Is there anything in your life that you regularly experience that you find irritating or annoying? And if there's a name, don't say it. Now, I guess the question is, if there is something that you find irritating or annoying, is there something that you could do so that you didn't have to experience that irritation or annoyance? You know, and as I asked that second question, the thing that comes to mind is that, well, I don't know if I could change that because, that person behaves that way. That's what they do, or this situation exists. What could I do to fix it? And when we look at our problems or our challenges that way, the issue that we're experiencing there is that maybe we're looking for the solution in the wrong direction. That when something regularly irritates us or annoys us or makes us uncomfortable, we tend to think in terms of solutions that are outside of us, that they need to change, or that thing needs to go away. But maybe the path for each of us is an inside of us change. That maybe I need to change the way I look at things, the way I experience things, so that those things can go on around me and I not get annoyed. Right? Because the one and only thing that we can control is what? Ourselves. Right? So as we continue the series we started last week, is it time for a change? Right? That's the sort of thing that we're looking at, right? Is that we're looking specifically at this idea of kind of having a pattern of behavior that we would like to change about ourselves. That, we have these situations that maybe there's some kind of unhealthy habit that we have in our lives that we would like to move away from, or maybe some positive habit that we'd like to bring into our lives. But we experience this kind of challenge over and over again. That we try to bring the new healthy things in, and they don't seem to stick around very well. But those old habits, those unhealthy habits that we're trying to move away from, they come back really easily. Right? And so what's going on there, right? That's the situation that we're looking at. That maybe we need to address that and see what we can do. And remember that as we kicked off the series last week, we looked at this verse from the Apostle Paul. Right? Paul says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." And he's getting to the core of the issue, right? That when we're trying to change our habits or our behavior, the thing that we know does not work is behavioral change. I just want to do this different thing. I want to introduce this new thing, or I want to let go of this old thing. And how do we know it doesn't work? Because we keep trying, and it keeps not working. So the solution has to be something deeper than that. Right? And that's what Paul means when he says, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. He's saying that real transformation has to happen at a deeper level, that the way we view the world around us is something that we need to address. Right? That we all have developed a state of mind, and in order to change our experiences, we need to renew that state of mind. And as we talked about last week, we talked about this idea that kind of transformation involves a process of change. And why does change require a process? Because the state of mind you now have, that I now have, resulted from a process. Right? You've been in a process of mind development from the moment you were born to this very moment in time. And throughout all of that time, each one of us have had a series of experiences. And each one of those experiences, the good ones, developed our state of mind. And the bad ones developed our state of mind. So if we want to really have transformation or a renewed mind, as Paul describes it, then we want to go through a process that gives us a chance to renew that mind, to adjust things. And last week, as we got started, we looked at that process from a high level, went through a series of steps from a really high level. And what I want to do this week is look at the beginning of those steps a bit more closely. Remember that we talked about the fact that we need to identify the experiences that we've had that have developed the habits and behaviors in our lives. And we want to understand how those experiences have shaped our habits or behavior. So that's really just our goal for today, to understand kind of what were the formative factors that put us in that place. And so I think to get us started on that, there's a really good passage from the book of Isaiah that really gives us clarity over what's going on. The thing is that I don't know if it'll feel like it at first, because the book of Isaiah is a really old book. Right? It's part of the Old Testament. We believe it was written about 700 years before the time of Jesus. So for us, that's a book that's 2,700 years old. So they're going to describe things in terms different than we might see the world, but we'll see that we can really apply it in our lives. And so this passage talks about this idea that there's a woodworker, and he goes out, and he cuts down a tree, and he pieces up the tree, and he collects all the wood. And then it says, he burns part of the tree to roast his meat and to keep himself warm. And he says, that fire feels good. So he's going out, he's got a tool where he's got a block of wood, and he does something good with it, right? He cooks his dinner, and he gets warm. Now, what's that block of wood doing for him? Well, it's providing comfort, right? It's providing food and warmth. And depending on how hungry he is or how cold it is, it may be beyond providing comfort. It might actually be relieving pain. And so he looked at it and said, wow, that is a source of comfort. That relieves pain. If it worked in this situation, maybe it'll work in all my situations. Because he goes on to say, then the woodworker takes the wood that's left and makes his God a carved idol. He falls down in front of it, worshiping it and praying to it. Rescue me, he says, you are my God. Now, I read that and you're like, I don't work with wood, and I don't have any idols in my life. I don't bow down in front of a carved idol. So what does this have to do with my life? Well, first of all, we should look at the definition of an idol, right? An idol can be a carved item, but what else can an idol be? Right? Anything that has outsized influence in our life, right? Anything that's kind of a bigger importance, a bigger part of our life than maybe it should be. And that's really what's happening with this woodworker that Isaiah talks about. That because that block of wood helped him in one area of his life, he has decided that it must have some kind of magic power to help him in every area of his life. So anytime he's experiencing pain, anytime he experiences discomfort, he turns to that block of wood. And he's given it a pretty face, but he turns to that block of wood and says, you'll save me now. And you're like, I still don't get it. What does this have to do with me? Right? Well, think about the idea of idols. Right? And think about what's happening in this person's life. Right? That he had something that was actually helpful, that block of wood. But as he gave it outsized control, he did something interesting. This thing that was meant to serve him, he has now become a slave to. And he looks to it. So do we have idols in our lives? You know, there's an easy one that I think that many of us can identify is money. Right? Is money good? Is money bad? I would argue it's neither. It depends on how you use it. Right? Money is benign. It's just money. But you can do really good things with it. Right? You take care of your family, you buy food, you have shelter. You know, that we're able, because of your support for us, we're able to, work with the homeless, right? Feed people, help people who are struggling with addiction, right? Support the schools, support the camps, right? So money does lots of good things if we use it that way. But also, if you've ever had money trouble, or if you've ever been in a relationship with someone who views money differently than you do, there is nothing that can create more pain than that. I mean, how many relationships have broken up over disagreements about money? How many families have been torn apart because of an inheritance where there wasn't a clear will, and that I should get more money than you? And how many times do we do things like, money's not important to me, but I just want to take care of my family, but that we work so much, we should destroy our families because we're never home and we're never around. Right? That is a very clear picture of money's money. It's fine. But it all is in how you use it. And one of the problems with money is If you don't have enough, you really crave it, of course. But once you start to see the power of money, because it can be so powerful, it very quickly can develop outsized power and lead us into doing things that are actually damaging. Now, for many of us, we may not have a money issue, and it's important to understand that I choose money as a starting point because it's such a clear thing that I think we can all identify with. But issues do not have to be as big as money to have that kind of idol effect on us. In other words, being an idol. That much more subtle issues can form our behavior, but ultimately, much like that woodworker who got a little bit of good and decided it was going to do lots of good, we all have behaviors and our experiences in our life that lead us there. I mean, if you want to reflect back on to when you were a kid, and maybe someone in your life was really judgmental and really critical about it. And every time they did that to you, that was really painful. And you wanted to deal with that somehow. So maybe the way you dealt with it was that you started to worry about every little detail of every little thing. That you would work as hard as you could to make sure that they couldn't find anything wrong with it this time. Now, of course, they always did. But at least you were trying to protect yourself. And that was a rational response. You're experiencing pain. And so the way to minimize that pain is to worry about every last detail so that you can at least have less pain. And it worked for you for a while. But now as an adult, what happens? Now you worry all the time, right? That worry starts to own you, that you have a hard time enjoying anything. And so what happens is that response that you developed for a very good reason to minimize or at least limit the pain you were experiencing has now become something that's taken outsized control of your life, and worry is in charge. And it can go many other ways, right? Like imagine that you actually had someone, same sort of thing, someone's judgmental of you, they're critical of you, but your response is different, and this is something that I had to deal a lot with, is that my response to a person in my life who was very judgmental of what I did was anger. Right, that I would actually, to try to minimize the pain that I was feeling based on that person's behavior, I would get angry at them. Now, I'm just a kid. I can't show that anger. But if I was angry inside, at least it hurt a little bit less when they did what they did. But of course, what happens from that? Well, that means anger becomes your natural response to anybody who says anything you don't like. Right? Anytime someone tries to give you feedback, hey, that's a great idea, but can we do it this way? Well, no. This is fine. And anger, which was something that can protect us on the inside, we think, and we had no other choice because we had no control. Now, even though we grow and we have control, that anger starts to own us. And it starts to drive a great deal of our lives. Right? And there are so many examples like this. If you grew up in a household where people were always just kind of, very negative, that they just kind of put down whatever happened and everything was bad. And you become a person who says, well, if I do anything and I make any mistakes, they just tell me all the mistakes I've made and all the mistakes I'm going to make, even if I haven't tried yet. So you stop trying. And you grow into a life where you don't really step out. You just start to play it safe all the time. And you never really get to participate in life because you're just trying to, it worked back then, maybe it'll work now. And it starts to control us. Right? Those are all cases where something that was helpful becomes out of control. And it doesn't only happen when we're kids. Good news, you can still develop bad habits as an adult. Right? And I think we know that, right? But you think about things. I was just thinking of a couple quick examples and I'll move on. If you ever went through a period of your life where you just felt things were really unsatisfying, really empty, and you just wanted some excitement. So maybe you checked out sports betting, and, it was fun. The game that was boring isn't boring anymore. But now you're betting too much, and you're creating financial stress. Or you go check out a porn site, just for a little bump, a little excitement, and now you have a habit that you're hiding from the people in your life, knowing what it would do to them if they found out. Right, and it goes on and on. Stress, worry, pain, we're just trying to numb it. We start drinking, we start using. Right, we just start trying to overeat, anything to make it feel better. And all these things work for a little bit. But before long, they are in charge. Right? Before long, that tool that was helpful for a moment is now the master. It's now the thing that's driving our lives. We all have something in our lives that gets a hold of us, and it affects us. And it starts to drive us in directions we don't want to go, and we find it hard to move away from them. So what do we do about it? I mean, how do we move out of it? It's like, okay, I got it. People have problems. What do we do? I knew I had problems before I got here this morning. Well, that's a good start, because that is a really important part. That one of the things that we struggle with when we need to face life change, when we're really looking for renewal in our lives, is a recognition that some kind of change is necessary. Right, and as you folks know, that I spent a bunch of my time in ministry in prisons doing 12-step work, and for other people. I went through it myself, but to be clear, I wasn't in prison needing 12-step work, but I wasn't, come on, that's a little funny. Come on. They're like, no, absolutely. He was in prison doing 12-step work. I've gone through the steps. I think it's a really healthy thing, right? But when you sit down with someone who's dealing with a large issue like that, where you're dealing with drugs or alcohol or so forth, one of the first things that we ask people to do, there's multiple things, but one of the first things we ask for is to say we admitted that our lives have become unmanageable. Simply just acknowledge the fact that your life is in a state that you're not really happy with. You know, and one of the beauties of doing ministry in prison is that people can't deny that one. When you're incarcerated, it's like, yep, not working. You know, it's funny, outside of prisons, I have to work very hard to get people to see that. Inside of prisons, they're like, yep, I'm on it, you know. But that's kind of an interesting thing. You know, as I kind of go through these issues, you know, maybe your particular issue comes to mind, hopefully it does. And you go, you know, my life's not quite where I want it to be, but I don't think my life is unmanageable. I mean, I'd like to see some things better. I'm not perfect. But unmanageable is a bit too much for me. I'm not willing to make that acknowledgement. But I do think it's important that if you want to be free, if you want to be transformed, if you really want to see life change, we've got to acknowledge that something's not right. So maybe for you, you say, you know what, I'm not willing to admit that my life has become unmanageable. Maybe for you, the first step is we admitted that we were not fine. Right? I kind of beat on this one a little bit last week, right? That we have this tendency to say that we're fine. How you doing? Fine. Are you fine? I'm not always fine. You know, there are days I'm really frustrated and ignored, or annoyed, probably ignored as well, but annoyed. On Sundays, I feel that a lot, actually. No, yeah. You know, that I've done a lot of work to get out of that anger state that I was always in, right? And there are still times where I'm not doing things the way I want, or I'm not dealing with situations the way I want, and I have to acknowledge that in those times I am not fine. But if we will do that work to actually acknowledge that we're not fine, then we can acknowledge that there's something that can be done, right? So if we stop trying to convince ourselves and others that we're fine. I mean, you don't walk around going, I'm not fine, I'm not fine, I'm not fine. You don't want to do that, right? Right? But the idea is that you simply acknowledge that it's the case. And what does not fine mean? Right? Not fine can be that you're dealing with emotional challenges or pain or just things you're trying to process through, or your relationships are just kind of broken and it's not working well, that I had friends and I don't really seem to have friends anymore, or, you know, I got along with this family member well and I'm just not getting along with them anymore, or maybe I never got along with them. Right? That's all a case of being not fine. But it can also be something as simple as, my life is just not all I believe it could be. Right? And I'm not talking about having unrealistic goals. I'm simply saying that if we look at ourselves and the gifts that God has given us and the opportunities He's put in front of us, are we just not able to step into those? That's enough to be not fine, right? You were created on purpose with a purpose. And we are all called to step into those moments because that's the true satisfaction in life. You know, there's actually a research that shows that you get groups of people where one group of people said their primary goal in life was to be happy. And there was another group of people that say that their primary purpose in life was to pursue meaning. And what you find is the people who say that my primary purpose in life is to be happy, neither are happy nor do they find meaning. But the people who choose to pursue meaning find meaning and are also happier. Right? Because we are all built to do things that are meaningful. We have all been equipped to do things that are meaningful. And we are all given opportunities to do things that are meaningful. So if your life is in any of those buckets, just be willing to admit, I'm not fine. And I want to do something more. I want to become more fine. And so Paul gives us a little bit of guidance on kind of what's going on here. Like what led to all this? Everything I've just kind of said, he really kind of narrows it down to a single statement. And this actually comes from the book of Romans, which is the same place he wrote about being transformed with the renewal of our mind. He says, don't you realize that you become the slave of whatever you choose to obey? So acknowledging that we all have something going on inside of us that is pulling us off track, it's keeping us from doing the things that we want to do. And so if we can acknowledge that, then we can begin to work on it. Right? So we really want to do it. If we're going to do this well, is that we want to acknowledge that we're not fine, as I've said, and then we also want to identify how we got there. Right? So as I bring this around, as I wrap this up this morning, the thing that I want us to understand is that it doesn't have to be a mystery how we got here. Right? One of the challenges that we experience, that if we're not really being honest with ourselves, as we start to think about how we got into the condition we're in, whatever that might be, we start to pull back. We start to be afraid to look at it. That we start to be concerned about if I get too close to it, I won't know what to do with it. Or maybe I just don't even want to know. Now, you know your subconscious knows, but as you try to suppress that or repress that, that creates all kinds of emotional challenges. Right? So if we want to really move into a healthier place, to be in a healthier existence, we want to go to that next step. Right? And so what I want to do is, as I finish up this morning, is simply look at or ask each of us to look at ourselves and think about how we got here. What is the thing that has led to this moment where you just don't feel fine? Like, what did you experience? What did you go through? What did that do to you? And how did it manifest itself this way? As we pick up next week, we'll actually carry on and talk more about what to do with that. But the last thing I want to do here is just kind of put a couple things in front of you on the screen just for things to think about. Right, so the first thing I really want to encourage you to do is I've simply this one. Just admit that you're not fine. Right? Admit it at a minimum to yourself. That's a good starting point. If there's someone in your life that you trust, be willing to admit it to them as well. That can be really hard. So just, make sure it's someone you trust. Be careful about it. But then if you are willing to admit that to yourselves, I'd like you to take a notebook or a journal or anything, and I want you to answer 3 questions. And the 3 questions that I want you to answer them just for you. Don't show it to anybody. Don't share it with anybody. Because if you think you're going to share it with someone, it's hard to be honest. Right? So write it down somewhere. Write it down and burn it if you want to. But do the exercise answering these 3 questions. Okay, so first you've admitted that you're not fine. And then think about it. What habit or behavior has outsized control in your life? What has become too big in your life? What habit or behavior do you lean on too much to get through the day or to find a sense of purpose or try to find value? Like, what is it that you're leaning on day after day to do that? And then the next question. When you do that thing, what feeling or emotion are you trying to create, or are you trying to escape? Because that's what we're doing. By the way, I will point you to a place you can find this online later, by the way, if you want to. I see you guys typing feverishly, which I really appreciate, by the way. But I'll put it online so you guys can find it. I'll point that out towards the end. So this is a really important thing, is that when something has an outsized place in our life, there's something we're trying to avoid some pain. We're trying to find a sense of peace. We're trying to find a sense of comfort. Or is there a disturbance that goes on inside of us that just makes us nervous and upset when things are too quiet? I mean, that's the signal to Bonnie that I'm not doing well. If I have to have something playing all the time, music playing all the time, or a book playing all the time, she's like, yeah, how you doing? You know, sort of thing. And that's just kind of the wake-up call I need, because I do it gradually and I lose track of it. She has to live with it, so it's different, right? And so the last question is, and I alluded to this just a second ago. Why do you feel the need to create that emotion? Or why do you feel the need to escape that emotion? The whole idea of this is that by acknowledging that we are not fine, and then going through this exercise of saying that, well, this is a thing that's gotten a bit out of control, or and maybe not even out of control, just a little too big. And then go, oh, and when I do that, that takes this pain away, or it introduces this sense of peace or comfort. And this is why I'm looking for it. If you can just know the answers to those questions, that will put you on a track of renewal that is kind of superior to anything that I've ever experienced. I mean, there's still more work to do, but man, that is an incredible on-ramp to get there. Now, as I mentioned, I'll tell you kind of after communion where you can find this online, because I don't want to take more time here now. But the thing that I want us to recognize, and this is what I kind of opened up with, is this realization that life can be richer than it is now. And life does not have to be bad for there to be room to be better. You know, that so often we're kind of like, well, it's not bad, it's okay. Well, make it better than not bad, right? Make it meaningful, make it joyful, make it happy. And that path is available.